what are the kind of applications you're looking at here? Is it largely transport based, as we've discussed, or are we talking even broader than that?
Um, Generally, it will be applications in things which move. That's not necessarily just transport. So, as I mentioned, a combine harvester, in fact, generally, many agricultural vehicles are characterized by increasingly high power density. Just to put some flavor to that, a machine that's called a forager, which is a kind of harvester that cuts up crops like maize for cattle feed. A typical forager is about 1,000 horsepower, so more powerful than a Formula One car, and running constantly at full power. There are no corners to lift off throttle as you would have in a racing car. So this machine runs flat out, maybe 14, 16-hour shift, and it's not driving on a road, it's driving on soft ground. So, very difficult to conceive of how you might electrify such a machine with heavy batteries. Hydrogen shouldn't be ruled out in that type of application, but clearly to replace like for like with a synthetic diesel would be a perfect solution, with certainly with the existing capital assets that are out there all across the world. Because this is another factor we have to consider, not only the endpoint, but the transition. And we live in a world with huge capital base around the fossil fuel solutions. And we mustn't forget the amount of energy required to convert. If there is a new pathway that's better, we also need to consider the rollout and the phasing of that. I talked rather long about agricultural, but you get into mining equipment, for instance, huge trucks the size of your house. These things, maybe they're a better example of the transition where, such vehicles could last 50 years, and no reason to, if you add up the numbers, probably better to invest in synthetic diesel for such a vehicle than say, I'm going to throw it away and start again with a different motion system. So then we get into aircraft, which we've mentioned. Military is another sector, very, very dependent on high density energy. And of course, we come back to motor racing, which you mentioned at the beginning. Motorsport, there's a clue in the name. It's all about motors and what people, it's an entertainment at the end of the day. It serves no objectively useful function in the world, but we're all human beings, and we live to enjoy life, and entertainment's part of that. And in that context, we have Formula E, which is an electric racing series. But I think it's increasingly recognised that petroleum fuels are still, a necessary part because of the energy density of a future entertaining sport. So we believe that synthetic fuels will remain a strong part of motor racing. And that extends also to automotive generally. I think for personal transport, a move to electric vehicles is absolutely the right thing. We're fully supportive of that at Zero Petroleum. It's the most efficient. We have vehicles that are not driven to the limits of performance. It doesn't matter if they're a bit overweight compared to a gasoline or diesel equivalent. It's the energy efficiency which matters most. But when you reach the sort of top end of that sector, specialist cars, supercars, whether we like it or not, and I know there are people who consider such things excessive and wasteful, but we live in a world where you can't tell people what to do across the whole planet. We have to recognise people do, in many cases, what they want to do. So we need to support that with good engineering that gives renewable and sustainable solutions around people's demands. So at the top end of automotive market, we have very, very extreme performance cars run privately. There is a solution that's ready for synthetic fuels. And of course, we have all the legacy of the historic vehicles, which will be around with collectors and hopefully seen around for hundreds and hundreds of years to come. And there's no excuse there to say, well, that's an old car, so I'll carry on using old fuel. There's a responsibility in that sector to move to circular and sustainable solutions, which we can provide. We actually already have a gasoline that would go straight in many cars without further processing and work absolutely fine and be completely fossil free